Shalom. I give all honor and glory praises to Yahweh, by Hashem, Yahweh Shai, by Hashem, the Kakadash. The abundance to the elders and apostle great men, those who help me the truth and sincerity, citation to the hopeful, that the spirit of the fragrance of their. Give me another day to burn entitled Death and Resurrection. Death and Resurrection Foretold. I'm going to start here on Mark 9:30. It reads, and they departed thence and passed through Galilee, and he would not that any man should know it. For he taught his disciples and said unto them, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of men, and they should kill him, and after that he's killed, he shall rise the third day. Okay. So this is a foretold, a foretelling of the Yahweh Shai being put to death. Okay. But they understood not that saying and were afraid to ask him. So the disciples didn't understand what Yahweh Shai was saying, right? They didn't understand that Yahweh Shai was going to be delivered to the hands of man, which would represent the hands of the people, okay, whether it's Esau or whether the Romans or the Israelites, right? Which was he was delivered to the Romans, okay, and the Romans ultimately delivered him, Yahweh Shai, to the Israelites, and the Israelite was the one that was really persecuting Yahweh Shai, right? Mocking him, punching him, just doing all types of immoral things, right? But the disciples, they don't understand what that meant. Okay. Yeah. So the Israelites condemned Yahweh Shai to death. Okay. So it was the Israelites that really, killed Yahweh Shai, right? Because the Romans, but the Pilate, he didn't file any probable cause, okay, to condemn Yahweh Shai to the cross, or to, condemn Yahweh Shai to death, right? It was the Israelite that brought up different charges, right? Which one of the charges was, blaspheming, right? The Yahweh Shai was saying that he's a son of Yahweh, right? He's a king of the Jews, right? So which he is, okay. That was all true and factual statements made by Yahweh Shai. Okay, but the Israelites, they didn't understand that, right? And mainly the Jews, I'm referring to mainly the southern kingdom, right? Benjamin, Levi, and Judah, right? Because they were the only tribes that was there during the time of Yahweh Shai, right? The northern kingdom, they were inhabiting the Americas, right? The new world, per se. Okay, so the disciples didn't understand what Yahweh Shai was was talking about, and he came to Capernaum, and he being in the house, he asked them, "What was it that ye disputed among yourselves by the way?" But they held their peace, for by the way they had disputed among themselves who should be the greatest. And he sat down and called the 12 and says unto them, if any man desires to be first, the same should be last of all and servant all, right? So Yahweh Shai is giving, Yahweh Shai, right? He came down as a human, okay, battling the human flesh, okay, and then what he was, he was Yahweh Shai, he's in his human flesh, right? He's ultimately, because he became lower than the angels. Though the scripture said he became lower than angels, and he ultimately served men. Okay, he washed his disciples' feet. Okay, he said among the publicans. Okay, tax collectors. Okay, the harlots. Right, you know. So he was what you call it, a carpenter. Okay, so he definitely served people, right? He built things for people, right? So yeah, which is a prime example of being great, but um, but being a servant of all, right? Yahushua, he is the first, right? He's the first, he's the only begotten son of heaven Father, right? You know, but guess what? Yahweh made the only begotten son, the first son, right? The servant of all, okay? So and it's really teaches about how the servant is not greater than the master, right? So we're not greater than Yahushua. We can't have the mindset of being the greatest, all right? You know, because in order to be, that's a heavy burden to carry. To be great, you have to be last, right? You have to be servant of. You have to go through many trials and tribulations, temptations. Okay, you have to be tried, and you have to be really humble. Okay, you know, and just looking at our apostles, the elders and apostles, great Muslim, right? They're showing that you know in their positions, right? They are humble, right? You can see in their face they're humble, right? They it shows, right? You know, so because they're looking at Yahweh Shah, as an example, of being in a high position, right? But we're maintaining that humility, maintaining that humble mindset, right? You know, being a servant. And he took a child and set him in the midst of them. And when he had taken him in his arms, he said unto them, whosoever shall receive one of such children in my name receiveth me. And whosoever shall receive me receiveth not me, but him that sent me, right? You receive the head of Father, Yahweh. Okay. All right. So I'll close it here by giving honor and glory and praises to Yahweh by Hashem, Yahweh Shem, by Hashem, Kadash, and the Shalom.